The first entry began with the sound of the waves. The lighthouse stood on a jagged island of black rock, a crooked finger thrust into the endless gray of the northern sea. The sea broke against it with a rhythm that seemed older than time itself. The new keeper had taken his post in late autumn, when the days were shorter, the air carried salt like knives, and the gulls shrieked as if mocking his presence. He had accepted the position with a mixture of relief and dread, for it promised both solitude and safety from the world he had left behind. Each morning he rose before dawn, wound the clockwork of the great lantern, polished its glass, and noted the weather in the logbook. He recorded the force of the wind, the height of the tide, the condition of the sky. He knew his duty was simple. He was to keep the light burning so that ships would not break themselves upon the rocks. Yet even in those first days, as the sea wrapped the tower in fog and the gulls vanished into the whiteness, he felt that the light was not only for the ships. It was also a beacon against something else, something that moved across the black water when no ship was near. The logbook became his only voice. He wrote with meticulous care, though he knew no one might ever read his words. The first week passed without incident. He noted the silence between the crashing waves. In that silence he thought he heard voices, but only faintly, like wind pressing against glass. He dismissed it as the echo of his own blood. At night he paced the spiral stairs of the tower, listening to his boots strike the iron steps, the sound repeating itself long after it should have died away. On the 8th night he wrote of a light on the horizon, not the steady glow of a ship's lantern, nor the rolling beam of another lighthouse, but a cold glimmer that drifted across the sea as though searching. He watched it for hours, until his eyes stung from the strain. When he blinked it was gone. He told himself it had been nothing more than a trick of the moon on the waves, yet he could not sleep. His meals became smaller. He ate bread and salt pork, dried peas soaked in seawater. The oil for the lantern was kept in heavy casks in the storehouse, and he checked them again and again, as though he feared they might be emptied in the night. The loneliness pressed against his chest until it hurt to breathe. Still he wrote. The diary grew longer. He described the sound of the sea beating the cliffs, the way the spray clawed at the narrow windows of the tower. He described the fog that rolled in like wool, thick enough to choke him, and how the gulls seemed to vanish as soon as it touched the rocks. He described the quiet footsteps that followed him in the stairwell. They were never in time with his own. When he stopped climbing, the other steps continued for 1 or 2 beats before fading into the silence. He began to leave the lantern burning through the day as well as the night. He told himself it was for safety, that the fog was too dense to risk extinguishing it. Yet in truth he feared the moment when the light would go out, feared what the darkness might reveal. By the 3rd week, his handwriting had grown jagged. He wrote of the sea as if it were alive. He claimed that it breathed, that each wave was a convulsion of something vast sleeping beneath. He wrote of whispers rising from the tide pools at dusk. He bent close to the rocks and thought he could hear words spoken in a tongue older than human memory. He no longer recorded wind speed or barometric pressure. Instead, he measured the intervals between the footsteps behind him and the moments when the light on the horizon reappeared. On the 23rd night, the glimmer was closer. He watched from the gallery at the top of the tower, his coat stiff with salt, his breath clouding the air. The light did not bob as a lantern would. It slid across the water, unbroken by the swell, neither sinking nor lifting. It came within a mile of the rocks before vanishing. He kept the lantern burning at full strength until dawn. The waves grew louder. He stuffed cloth in his ears, and still he heard them, not as the crash of water, but as a slow chant, rhythmic, unending. He marked it in the diary with lines of slanted script. It is calling. It is calling. It does not stop. On the last day of the month, he wrote of the tower itself. He claimed that the stones sweated at night, that the mortar softened as though the sea were inside the walls. He heard dripping in the stairwell, but found no water. He heard doors opening and closing, though there were no doors except his own. He wrote that the tower did not want him there, or that something within the tower wanted him alone. The diary entries grew longer, filling pages with restless strokes. He described dreams in which he walked the shore and found footprints in the sand leading into the surf. He described shadows that moved across the beam of the lantern, blocking its light for moments at a time. He described the footsteps again and again. Sometimes they were slow, deliberate, just behind him. Other times they raced up the stairs ahead of him, reaching the gallery before he did. When he opened the hatch to the lantern room, nothing waited but the lamp itself, burning without flame. In the 2nd month, he ceased to measure time. The calendar remained pinned to the wall, but the days blurred together. He wrote only of what he saw, and what he saw was no longer bound to the hours of the sun. The sea burned with strange lights almost every night. Some were pale like bone beneath water. Others were green or blue, shifting in patterns that suggested enormous shapes rising and falling just below the surface. He swore he saw arms or fins or wings, though each vanished before he could hold it in his gaze. The sound of footsteps grew louder. At times it seemed there were several pairs, climbing the stairs in unison. He pressed his back against the wall and watched the stairwell, but nothing appeared. Still the steps rang against the iron until his teeth ached. The diary filled with fear. He began to question whether the mainland existed at all, whether the sea had swallowed it as it swallowed everything else. He wrote of the gulls that no longer cried, of the fish that no longer floated near the tide pools. He wrote of silence so thick it felt like cloth pressed against his face. And then one night he wrote of the knock, 3 times against the wooden door at the base of the tower. Clear, deliberate, patient. He had not heard a boat. He had not seen a light. The knock came again, and he did not move. He sat at the desk with the diary open before him, ink drying on the nib of the pen, and listened as the sound echoed through the stone. When it ceased, he dared to breathe again. He wrote the words with a shaking hand. Something is at the door. The following nights were worse. The knock came again and again, never at the same hour, always 3 times. Sometimes it was soft, as though with bare skin. Other times it rattled the iron hinges. He did not open. He did not dare. The footsteps grew bolder. They no longer waited for him to move. He heard them pacing the tower at night, circling the lantern above, tapping at the windows. Once he woke to find the diary open at the foot of his bed, the last page filled with words he had not written. The ink was wet, the letters crooked, the language unknown. He tried to burn the page in the flame of the lantern, but the paper blackened without turning to ash. The words remained even in the charred fibers. He shut the book and placed it beneath his mattress, though he could feel it pulsing like a heart as he lay awake. The waves thundered against the rocks. The tower trembled. He believed the sea was climbing, that each tide rose higher than the last, that soon the island would vanish beneath the black water. He no longer wound the clockwork. The lantern burned of its own accord, the glass never dimming, the wick never shrinking. He began to fear that he was no longer tending the light at all, but that the light was tending him. Still he wrote. He could not stop writing. His hand cramped, his nails tore, yet the words spilled across the pages in a torrent. He begged for someone to read them, to come and take the book away, to prove he had not dreamed at all. He wrote of the footsteps, the knocks, the whispers, the lights in the sea. He wrote of shadows that gathered in the stairwell, too tall, too thin, with arms that brushed the stone. The diary ended in a scrawl that stretched across both pages. It has come inside. Then silence. The tower stood against the waves. The light swept across the endless water. The sea breathed, and in the silence between the crash of waves and the sweep of the beam, the sound of footsteps echoed still. The diary was found weeks later. A supply boat from the mainland had arrived on a gray morning, the sea restless beneath a sky of iron. The men aboard expected to see the keeper waiting on the rocks, oilskins bright against the black cliffs. But no figure appeared. No signal flag flew from the mast of the tower. The lantern still burned though the day was full, its white beam sweeping the waves like a blind eye that refused to close. The men anchored the boat and climbed the slick ladder bolted to the rock. The wind cut their faces, carrying the taste of salt and rot. They called for the keeper, but heard nothing but the crash of the tide. When they reached the door, they found it unlocked. The hinges groaned as they pushed it inward, releasing the smell of damp stone and burned oil. Inside the tower, silence hung heavier than the sea. The men's boots struck the iron steps, echoing up the stairwell, yet each echo lingered too long, as if more feet climbed behind them. They searched each chamber. The bunk was unmade, the sheets stiff with salt. The table was littered with scraps of bread hardened to stone. The storehouse held its casks, each full of oil untouched. Yet the keeper was gone. On the desk in the watchroom lay the diary. Its leather cover was warped with moisture, its pages blackened in places, but the words could still be read. One of the men opened it with a gloved hand and frowned at the jagged script. He read aloud the final line, the one stretched across both pages like a wound. It has come inside. They closed the book at once. None of them wished to linger, yet the rules of their duty bound them. They searched again, from the foundation to the lantern room. In the gallery they found the glass of the lantern flawless, yet the flame within had no wick, no oil. It burned without sound, without smoke, a core of white that never wavered though the wind rattled the panes. They dared not touch it. When the search ended, they returned to the desk. The diary lay where they had left it, though none remembered placing it there. They agreed to take it back to the mainland. Perhaps the keeper had lost his mind. Perhaps he had drowned. Perhaps the sea had taken him. Whatever the truth, the book was evidence. The oldest of them tucked it under his arm as they descended the stairs. Each step groaned. Each echo doubled itself, until it seemed a crowd descended with them. When they reached the door, the wind struck it closed before they could step through. It took both men together to force it open. The sea roared, black against the rocks. They returned to their boat. The ladder shook beneath their weight. When they cast off, the tower stood behind them, the lantern still sweeping, its light pale even under the noon sun. None of them spoke as they rowed back to the steamer. Only the man who carried the diary looked back, and when he did he thought he saw a figure standing in the gallery, a shadow pressed against the glass. The mainland was waiting. The harbor master took the diary with reluctance. He placed it on his desk as though it might soil the wood. He read the first entries and nodded. He read the later pages and frowned. When he reached the scrawl at the end, he shut the book and ordered that it be kept under lock. He said nothing to the villagers, only that the keeper had vanished and another must be found. But the book was not silent. At night the harbor master heard the sound of waves though his house was miles from the shore. He heard footsteps climbing the stairs though no one lived above him. He dreamed of lights moving on the horizon, green and blue, shifting like the scales of vast creatures. He woke with the taste of salt in his mouth. He tried to ignore it. He told himself it was imagination. Yet the diary called to him. He unlocked the drawer and opened it again. The words seemed different. Sentences shifted, letters bent. On one page he read his own name, scratched into the margin. On another he found a sketch of the harbor drawn in lines of black ink, though no such drawing had been there before. The book grew heavier each time he lifted it. He felt its weight in his arms, as though it were filling with water. The pages smelled of seaweed, of rot, of blood. When he touched them, his fingers came away wet. He resolved to burn it. He carried it to the hearth and laid it on the coals. The fire roared, yet the book did not burn. The flames curled around it without leaving a mark. The white heat of the lantern on the island seemed to glow from its spine. He seized it with tongs and threw it into the sea, but the next morning it lay once more on his desk, dry and whole. Word spread among the men who had been to the tower. They spoke of dreams filled with footsteps, of knocks on their doors at night, of shadows in their stairwells. One swore that when he looked into the tide pools, he saw his own reflection grinning though his face was still. Another claimed he had heard the lantern calling his name across the waves. Fear grew in the village. The sea that had once fed them now seemed hungry. Nets returned empty. Fish rotted in the baskets before they could be salted. The gulls were gone. Only the sound of waves remained, louder each day, beating against the cliffs as though they sought to break the land apart. The harbor master kept the diary close, for he felt that to leave it unattended would be worse. He read its final line again and again. It has come inside. He wondered whether the keeper had written of the tower or of himself. He wondered whether the words might soon apply to him as well. In time the lighthouse required a new keeper. No one from the village volunteered. At last a stranger came, a man from inland who had never seen the sea. He was told only of the duties, not of the diary. He accepted with eagerness, for he believed the post would offer solitude and pay. He was ferried to the island by reluctant oarsmen. They left him with oil, bread, and water. He climbed the stairs of the tower, smiling at the sound of his own footsteps. He did not notice that the echoes lingered too long. The lantern burned without oil. He thought it a fine machine. He polished the glass and watched the beam cut the fog. He recorded the weather in the new logbook provided. Yet when he opened the desk drawer, he found the other diary waiting. Its cover was warped with salt. Its pages were swollen. The scrawl at the end bled across both leaves like a wound. He frowned. He did not remember bringing it. He had been told nothing of a previous keeper. Yet here it was, as though it had been waiting for him. He placed it back in the drawer and told himself he would not open it again. That night he heard footsteps in the stairwell. The waves struck the cliffs. The gulls were silent. The lantern burned. The diary lay waiting. The new keeper dreamed of lights moving beneath the sea. The tower kept its watch. And far away in the village, the harbor master woke to the sound of 3 knocks on his door.